everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Office Hours. As you can see, I'm continuing my trend of not having to do this show alone. I am joined today by another very special guest, someone you may be familiar with already. You may have seen this blue-haired individual floating around on the internet or doing some roleplay stuff with me and in other places. But if you haven't, I will let her introduce herself. Bluejay, what are you doing here? Who are you? What is your deal?
Are we starting with the questions already?
Yes. Oh, that's it. We'll talk about what this is going to be about. But first, welcome to the office.
Thank you. I got dressed up with the closest thing to a jacket that I have because it's the office and I have to be ready. But I'm Bluejay. And if you guys don't know me, I am a full-time Twitch broadcaster and I also do a ton of role play. I think very soon I'll be doing 4 shows a week. So giving Adam a run for his money. It's great. I am also running GMing my first show on Sunday of this week, which is less than a week away from right now.
That's right. It's only a few days, in fact. It's like at the other end of the week. It is swiftly approaching. It's going to be here any minute.
Yep.
Not to make you feel pressured or anything. So that's the salient point, isn't it? So you're running your very first role-playing game. And like I often suggest to people, you are doing it in a nice, low-impact, low-pressure way. Can we talk about that? So I'm here to give Bluejay advice, which is why that's what we do here on Office Hours. We give advice about game mastering. I'm in a particularly useful place to give this advice because Bluejay is going to be playing my game, award-winning tabletop role-playing game, Dungeon World.
Yeah.
So there's your first mistake. Secondly, I'm going to be playing in this game. That's mistake number 2. You got a good start. No, I'm just teasing.
Do you want me to talk about mistakes number 3?
So let's set the stage here, right? Because I think that learning to GM and GMing for your first time, there's lots of general kind of stuff that we can talk about that will help. But I think understanding the context is important because just a casual game with your friends or a game at a convention, a one-shot, a campaign, whatever, they're all quite different. So let's talk about the framework in which you are going to be playing your game. What are you doing? What's happening?
So first things first, I didn't just do this because I am a glutton for punishment. I mean, there's that too, but the GMing stream was unlocked by my community when I got to a certain number of subs. So like it was a thing where I was like, I want to be here and you guys want me to do this. So let's make this like a thing. And honestly, like I had it as a goal for like a year and a half. And it was kind of just like a meh. But then it happened real quick. And I guess, yeah.
Life comes at you fast.
So GMing Live was part of the deal. And I don't renege.
That's the one. You got it.
Yeah, renege on a deal.
Rule number 1 about game mastering: pronouncing every word correctly is very important. Very important. Don't get them wrong.
Thank you for your wonderful advice. And then secondly, I am in a space where the people who are influencing me in terms of like GM folks are all really cool and also very present. And I really wanted to do like a IGM for the people who have inspired me to be a GM and that have GM'd for me. So of course, Adam, you made the game. You're the reason why I started role playing 2 years ago in the first place. So you had to be part of it. And then the first role playing show that I watched when I was getting ready for our first episodes of Adventurers League was Critical Role, trying to figure out.
I'm not familiar with this Critical Role. What is
that? Yeah, you wouldn't be because you don't have time to watch any content. So I asked Matt to be on the show as well. And surprise, surprise, he actually had some time. I asked Naja Tristere because she is the memeiest, and she's GM'd for me for misclicks, and I knew that she would force me not to take things too seriously because, like, she's Naja, and you can't. If I tried to take things seriously and had Naja in my game, it would just, I would be in a world of hurt.
Naja and I have spoken briefly about her ideas for her character for your game, and I agree with everything you just said. Yep.
I know what I'm getting into. And I had a little bit of a hard time getting the last person. I asked Austin Walker, but he's impossible to schedule for anything.
For folks who are familiar with the internet, Austin Walker is both amazing and very busy. This is true.
So I ended up reaching out to another friend of mine, Holly Conrad, who has recently started DMing live. She's DM'd like for non-live groups before, but she's doing a sigil Planescape kind of game. But anyway, I think she's rad as fuck. So like she was just like, yeah, it kind of fits with the GM's theme, but also she's a sweetheart and I love her. So
yeah. Well, and I think also, so this is important to recognize that I think that when game mastering for the very first time, the people that you choose to play with is super important, right? Like I've talked about this lots on Office Hours where it's a collaborative effort, right? It isn't just the GM is the only one that matters and everyone follows their lead. It's that everyone needs to get along in a sense that they can all kind of work together and play together and make stuff. And what you've done at the very least is assemble people who are either already friends or friends with you or each other or who have played together. I've played with everybody in that list, and I think a lot of people on that list have all played with each other too. There's lots of cross-pollination there. So there's already a little bit of that chemistry, because it can be hard as a game master going into the first game because you can feel like you are the one responsible for everyone having a good time. And if the players don't know each other, that's much harder to get past that feeling.
And I also like wanted to make the point that like I was looking for a cast that I wanted to play with, who were like inspiring, creative people. But I was also like, I mean, we've been playing a game with Andrew and Elf and Dave for 2 years, and like it would have been really easy for me to be like, all right, guys, like let me just play with the people that I have a comfort zone with.
Yes.
So part of it was getting out of that comfort zone, and then part of it was I wanted to make sure that the cast I was assembling, because like I don't know, I decided to. There's a lot of really cool, very what's the word? I don't know. I keep thinking woke, and that's like a horrible way to phrase anything. But I just like it, very conscientious of what I'm presenting as a cast, and so I didn't want it to be a bunch of white dudes, and me, like not. I was very conscious of that, and so having some inspiring women, having some non-white folks, having like people of different like age ranges and experience was important to me.
What Bluejay is saying is that she invited me because I'm old. That's what she's saying here. That's what's going on.
That's not what I said.
No, and I think that's important, right? Because as we've talked about before, you bring stuff to the table that is representative of your personality and your experience as a person, and that gets into your character and into the game. And if you have a diverse group of players, they're going to tell diverse and interesting stories. So obviously that's a good call. So choosing your group, really important. Obviously, Bluejay is going to have different priorities around choosing the people that she plays with, and the framework, because we're streaming the game, is going to be slightly different than you might at home, but the fundamentals are the same, right? Choose people that you feel comfortable playing with, that you think are going to support you, and they're going to be there to back you up when you feel like you're not doing your best job, because that's going to happen. You're going to have moments playing the game where you're like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. And if you can't turn to your players and say, yo, help me out here, whether that's finding a rule or making an interpretation or whatever, you want to be able to look to your players, especially in a game like Dungeon World, which will enable that. And we'll talk about that sort of as the next thing. Why did you choose to play award-winning tabletop role-playing game, Dungeon World, instead of any other game?
Well, we've played a fair amount of systems, but definitely not like all of them by any length of like at all. But I
I
wanted to
think
play.
John Harper might be the only person on earth who's played every role-playing game. He made a diagram to prove it.
Nice, nice. I wanted to play one that I was familiar with, so that kind of cut down my options a fair bit. And then when I was thinking about the style of play that I wanted to GM specifically, and honestly, something that would take a little bit of the load off of my shoulders, playing a Powered by the Apocalypse system seemed like the way to go because, in my experience with one shots, especially Powered by the Apocalypse systems and the character creation involved, and how like that kind of takes a lot of like world building off the hands of the GM because while you're creating your characters and while you're creating the relationships that your characters have, that's when the world kind of like starts to define itself. So I really wanted that type of system specifically because I have a bunch of really creative people, and giving them a little bit of the responsibility when it comes to what the game world is will help me do better. And like you were saying about having like these, like you guys, I could fall into a coma and the game would still be entertaining because of the cast that I assembled. So like why not take advantage of that cast in a game system that gives them some influence over the storytelling.
Right. Yeah. Dungeon World, where the rules are made up and the dungeon master doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, we joke, but like to a degree, I think that's true because there's I describe in the mechanisms of Dungeon World, and if we revise or make a second edition of the book, this is going in the text, but I use it to describe it all the time. There is an imaginary dial in Dungeon World where on one end the game is a very traditional. The GM has certain responsibilities, and the player has certain responsibilities, and the player's responsibilities are describe what your character is doing and saying, and nothing else. And the GM does everything else. And that's on one end. And on the other end of the dial, nobody's really responsible for anything except what the rules say. So the players can say like, oh, elves are like this, or oh, this town is like that. And the GM can say, I don't know what monsters you encounter in the forest. What do you think? What do you want to fight? It's the like the thief saying, do I find a secret door, is saying, I bet you there's a secret door here, and the GM doesn't have a map, right? There's this very improvisational kind of other end of the spectrum. And I think that playing Dungeon World, you find either in the midst of play or during your prep or over time learning to play these games, the dial gets adjusted for each campaign. And so you find how much people are willing to put in and how much you have an idea coming to the table. And that's really something that emerges intuitively from, I think, a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games. Not all of them, certainly. Like, that dial is pretty locked for some games and locked in different places. But that's something that I think you'll kind of figure out or find as you play. And as I think you astutely pointed out, there's a reason that we do Dungeon World character creation early on because and live together because you build the campaign world, and your job during that is going to be to guide that process both mechanically but also to just ask a ton of questions about the things you're interested in, because your job DMing the game more than anything is to creative direct, is to be like, these are the things that I think all fit together in an interesting way, and I'm going to set those out in front of you. So I think if your goal is a game that will help offload some of the work, Dungeon World is a great choice. If you came to the table with like a really strong idea about what you wanted the campaign to be and what you wanted the game to feel like, if you had an idea about like compare and contrast your game with Holly's game, right? Like Holly knew she wanted to do a Planescape game. It wanted to be like a planar urban adventure. She had a lot of ideas and she understands the Planescape setting probably better than any of her players. Dungeon World might not be the game for that campaign because there's so much already built. So I mean, how much do you have in mind coming to the table? Like, what are you interested in exploring in this game, if anything?
Well, like rolling it back a little bit, also like when I was picking the system, I was looking at genre, and in terms of like narrowing it down to Powered by the Apocalypse systems, Dungeon World and the fantasy setting was a genre that I felt most comfortable with. Definitely space shit is like more than fantasy in terms of like my genre. fallbacks, but I've never played a space powered by the apocalypse.
There is like a massive gap. Like I've seen a bunch of Powered by the Apocalypse games that try to do sci-fi, but I've never seen one that does sci-fi in a way that I've liked. Like it's weird. It's just there's this weird design hole there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
why. Like people have tried, and it's probably as much about me. But like I look at the games and like they come close. You know, like we played the Sprawl for a while, and I was like, it's it's doing a thing that I dig, but it's not
I mean,
quite
that
what
was
I would want.
definitely more in terms of the like cyber fiction than any of the other stories that we've told. So
Yeah.
I mean, it worked in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so the fantasy is just a little bit like I have a little bit more experience with that. And then in terms of like what I have prepped, it's kind of like half of one thing, half of another, because I have a basic like kicker, I guess you've described it as,
Mm-hmm.
like set up an idea of how I want to plop the PCs into the world and give them something to do. But also, I am completely prepared for that to completely go out the window when character creation happens and you guys are just like not into it at all. Like, and so like I have stuff. I have I don't want to like spoil anything, but
Yeah.
I
No,
have
that's
like
fine.
a setup. I have like a little what I think is a one shot short length little
Mm-hmm.
quest. And I have complications that I've thought about in terms of like if they decide to go this way, then I could potentially do this thing.
Right.
Um, but
So
I'm also like prepared to be like, yeah, you know what, fuck it. You guys are in the ocean. I don't know.
the idea of a kicker, so the for me at least, a kicker in role playing game terms comes from an old role playing game called Sorcerer, and in Sorcerer. The kicker is a thing for your character. It's in character creation that is like an event or revelation or something that has happened to your character just before play begins that drives them into play. I often ask players when they're making their character, you know, what moved you from your past life. If you're looking at 5th edition D&D, for example, what made you stop being your background and start being your class, right? What was the thing that moved you from being a spy to a wizard? In Burning Wheel, it's what was the difference between your last life path and now, and how long has that been going on? How long have you been a PC? But you can look at kickers at a larger scale as a campaign event that kicks off the game. The things that make a strong kicker are unignorable events. It's a way to say, this is happening, and to prompt you for the most important question in Dungeon World. Hands down, most important question, the thing that you end basically everything that you say as the game master with, what do you do? You can direct it at the group, you can direct it at individual players, but basically just say that all the time because that's the game. The game is, what do you do? This is happening. What do you do? That happened. Now what are you doing? Right? That's what keeps the game moving. And the kicker puts you in a position to set the stage, and not in a traditional D&D sort of like, you're in a tavern and you look about the tavern and there are many a drink. A barman wipes a glass monotonously like he's an animated GIF. A scary old ranger peers at you from the corner. Like, none of that matters. That's all character creation stuff. You can skip all that and say, you know, you're in the middle of the street. The prince's wagon is tipped over and on fire. There's a cadre of assassins closing in your position, and the prince is bleeding to death in the street. What do you do? Right? And that's when everyone's going to be like, whoa, how do we get here? What's happening? And then you can start asking for moves, and you can kind of backfill as to why you're there. And then you can ask more questions. You can say, like, you know, one of you took this job. Who's responsible for the prince's life? And you can flesh out. So a good kicker is less declarative and more stuff is happening. Let's find out why and what happens next. Because that's the fundament of the game is playing to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
and I don't think that I'm as good at yet just like being like, okay, like let's just immediately hop into like this action filled like thing.
mhm.
I feel like part of your ability to just like this is a very interesting like stage and then I'm just gonna like set you all down in it is from experience, but definitely just like having an idea of a framework to help
Yeah.
me and like very basically just having a like here you go, PCs. Here's something that the NPC that is me wants you to do.
Yeah, well, and
So
I think there's buy-in too, right? Like because you're choosing people who are both professionals at streaming and being entertaining, who have had experience doing those things, who are good at being fun to watch, and you're choosing people you trust, we can all buy in to say, when you tell us what the premise is, no one is going to be that asshole who's like, well, my character wouldn't be doing this because I don't believe in the monarchy, so I stab the prince and I run away and I join the assassins. Now, as a GM, because I hate prep, especially for Dungeon World. I fucking hate it. I hate prepping Dungeon World. Um, Anything that makes me write anything down for Dungeon World feels too much like designing the game. So I come to the table with nothing and I just make up what's going on from character creation. But that's, like you said, that's a particular play style and it's very difficult to do right away, like as your very first time. So coming to the table with an idea, not about how things will go, but the things that you actually care about, the stuff that you're like, oh, I'm interested in this. And then trusting that we're going to follow your interest, that we're not going to say like, oh, well, you've obviously created this exciting plot hook, which we will ignore, and we're all going to go get drunk. We're not
I
going to be
mean,
those kinds of players.
that's fine. Let's just play the first 6 episodes of the new season of Critical Role, where all they do is steal shit and drink the whole time.
Yeah, which I think is like a form of D&D, but you got to remember too that with that, not to get too fine into the like assessment of tabletop role playing game as show, it doesn't really matter what they're doing because
Yeah.
like those people as entertainers sitting around a table just shooting the shit is a big part of the appeal of that campaign. You don't need to be Critical Role. Find the strengths of your own group. And
Oh
that
God,
goes,
I know that.
and that goes for everybody, right? Like if you are watching role play, if you're watching Roll20 Presents, you're watching any other show on the internet on Twitch that shows how a role playing game might be, think of it as a what if, not a this is how it is, right? If you are not having as much fun spending 24 hours of your campaign sitting around a tavern having your friends shoot the shit, if that's boring to you, that's okay. There's lots of different ways to play role-playing games that play to the strengths of the people playing. So figuring out your group and figuring out the game, which is what we're talking about, is super important for that. So
Yeah.
you have an idea of how you want things to go. You have some idea of like driving the narrative, right? You know kind of what you want to do to get us started. Let's talk about what stuff is making you feel like nervous. Let's just get right to the like hard shit. So what are
Okay.
you feeling anxious about the game? Like if it all goes horribly wrong, why will it have gone that way?
Um, well, what that's thanks.
Well, no, but I think this is important to think about. Like this for me is a way to assess the places where you feel most like you're gonna stumble or the game is gonna come apart, right? I do this all the time. Every time I do a show, I'm like, what am I terrified of here? What is the thing that I'm gonna fuck up or that the group is gonna fuck up or something is gonna go wrong? If I am aware of it, it helps me understand how to maneuver around it. So what feels to you like that? What is the thing where you're like, I'm gonna GM, and instead of being like, yeah, this is gonna be fun, it's like, oh shit, what am I doing?
One of the things about the game, like the system in particular, that's made me nervous is that, like combat wise, like being on the GM side of things and having to be like, okay, like if combat happens, like where do I get, like there's monsters in the book, but like how do I know like which ones, and like is this too many, or like do I just like flip through the book while you guys like run into some, I don't know, like ranger people in the woods or like fights, and like that combat stuff is very like I don't know what to do there,
Mm-hmm.
and that comes from like never having been on the GM side of the table and always having been the PC where your characters are created and like you have all of the things that you have from the beginning, and I don't have to worry about coming up with anything on the fly as a player.
Sure.
uh, but as a GM, like
Right, because you don't necessarily know what kinds of monsters might be in the game. So I'll lay this out. So for Dungeon World, combat and fighting and whatever is the same as all the rest of the game, with the exception of the fact that there are mechanical objects that are not the players. So there are monsters or whatever bandits. There's that, and they have stats. So that's when things like hit points, only these things, hit points and armor come into effect. Everything else is the same. You're still describing the situation, you're still making moves, you're still listening for the players to make moves. And then occasionally those moves will say how much damage someone deals, and sometimes they will say that someone has armor to reduce that damage. That's really it. I'll give you a hint. So Claire by Moonlight scooped me on this one in chat. Just use goblins. I don't honestly like the base. So for a one shot, if you want to like test out a combat encounter, something with 4, 5, or 6 hit points, 1 armor, and deals a d6 damage. I don't care what you describe it as. They could be bandits, they could be angry toddlers, they could be goblins or kobolds or whatever. Yes, we gave you this sort of full monster manual of stats and moves and stuff, but like if you're worried about getting it right, something that has between 4 and 6 hit points, 1 point of armor, and does a d6 damage is going to be a nice, safe thing, 1 or 2 per players, and you're good to go, right? Like, and you don't really have to worry about picking the exact right monster, because in Dungeon World, the monsters are not really mechanically that different from one another. The only thing that really changes them is how close do you have to be to fight them, right? What kinds of weapons are they using? So the range tags. And then what moves do they make? And if you can't come up with specific moves for angry toddlers, you just use your own regular GM moves, right? Because all a monster does is expand on the moves. You've got your moves list as the game master, and then the monster you're using adds, make shriek for more goblins, light something on fire, steal something. And they're just ideas for you when it's your turn to make a move. Mm-hmm. And that's it, right? That's how it goes. Dungeon World, the flow of play is always the same. Combat just adds in a couple more mechanisms to that flow.
Yeah, I guess I'm mostly scared, or was mostly scared about like picking the monsters, and less scared about the like actual combat part of it.
As the person who wrote and spent hours and hours and hours working on all of those awesome monster descriptions and coming up with moves, and then Sage put all the mechanisms in there, and so fuck all that. Like, it's useful between sessions, and once you get familiar with the sort of monster compendia part of the book, being like, oh wait, there's a dark elf or whatever, there's a deep elf that'll work good for this, or like, oh, this would be a great time to use an angel. Prior to that, all you got to do is just have like a little block of stats and go for it, right? Because you know instinctively, I think, the purpose of the monsters that you're using, right? You know what's fun about goblins. It's not that like they're a big dangerous threat. It's that they're obnoxious and they steal stuff, and they're gonna light you on fire, and they're gonna like cut open your bag instead of stabbing you. And those are all just moves you can make based on the list of moves. So combat in Dungeon World, I think we get this idea in role-playing games that combat is somehow suddenly when the real game starts, because of how Dungeons and Dragons works and Pathfinder and a lot of other games. Because it's like bullshit, nothing matters. Maybe you get inspiration, maybe you make a deception check, but it doesn't really matter at all. And then, roll initiative. Dungeon Master, now you have to be an encyclopedic variety of information about this game. That's not how Dungeon World works. Combat there's no Final Fantasy style, you've run into an encounter and now we're going into a different game. It's just the same stuff. So your job is laid out in the GMing chapter in Dungeon World, and I think it sort of behooves us to walk through that and talk about it a little bit. Okay. Because I think that's all I'm saying this because I wrote the fucking thing. Sage and I, we put this together specifically because this is what's happening. But it's worth going through and giving you an opportunity to ask questions. To be like, what do you mean by this? Or like, how can I do this thing? So the stuff when you sit down at the table as the game master, the stuff that you are intended to do is describe the situation, right? What is going on around the player all the time. This is just your job. Do that. It's how you start the session. It's how you keep things moving. It's how you get everybody back on track after somebody starts memeing out of control. This is just to say, this is where you are. This is what's going on. What do you do? Right? Mm-hmm. Following the rules, which means your GM rules, but also like keeping an eye out and an ear open for the players, describing something that triggers a move. Now, this is something that I will help you with. But ultimately, it's the table's call. The more familiar you get with Dungeon World, the more you're going to hear language that sounds like moves when people don't realize they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll be there to say like, oh, that sounds like hack and slash, or would you like to spout lore, or this sounds like you're casting a spell. If a cleric says, I pray to my god to heal me, what they're really saying is I cast cure wounds, right?
Yeah.
But they may not want to just straight out say that. The inverse is also true for following the rules. If someone says, I would like to use my hack and slash move, you can say, cool, what is your character doing? Because that helps you frame up everything else that flows from it. So that's following the rules. Part of following the rules is making moves. You get to make a move whenever any of the players look at you like, and then what happens?
Well, I feel like in Dungeon World, the make a moves is just like, here's some like creative ideas about what happens next, and less like actual moves.
Well, that's the thing. So a move on the player end, if you're experienced with Apocalypse World or games like it, a move is a concrete block of mechanical shit. It's when you describe your character doing a thing, make this move, roll the dice, or gain experience, or take damage, or whatever. Those are all moves. The GM's moves are tell the players what's happening, right? Move the narrative in a particular direction. And we wrote the list so that the narrative would flow in a particular way. And it's your job to make those moves whenever anybody says, players have this tone, and you've used it before, where they're like, I slap him in the face. Like, and then do I do it? What happens? Right? Like, this is waiting for the GM to be like, okay, let's go ahead and do the thing. So it may be that slapping someone in the face is a hack and slash. This may be a slap fight, and that's the context. But it also might be like, okay, cool, you deal him 1 damage. He falls on the ground crying. What do? That's a move. That's a very soft move. But it's your job when the player looks to you to be like, and then what? I do this. I jump off the roof. I tell the Manticore he stinks. I pull his jersey up over his head. Like what? And it's looking to you to say, okay, cool. Then what happens, GM? Then you make a move. And that's your job, is just make moves and then say, what do you do? Make the move, describe the situation. What do you do? And all of this stuff will flow from exploiting your prep, which is the 4th thing that you do as a GM. You use the things you already know to help you decide what moves to make. If you know the players are being hunted by an evil sorceress, you can make moves that flow from the evil sorceress. So when they say, cool, we are safe in the village, we all just go to sleep, no one takes watch, you can be like, cool, I'm going to exploit my prep. The evil wizardess haunts you with nightmarish dreams. Welcome to the dark dream realm. And now we're going to do that thing, right? And that's exploiting your prep. That's choosing to make a move to set up the narrative in a certain way. So all of this stuff flows from in the game. You have an agenda, you have principles, and you have moves. Mm-hmm. So your agenda is like your job. This is the stuff that you should be always aiming to do these things. And they are, sorry, go ahead.
For those at home, this is page 159 through 163 of Dungeon World.
Yeah, the GM chapter. The part where the game tells you how to run the game.
Yeah, no, I read it. I read that book that you wrote. I read that.
Good work. Good. Well, do you have any questions about those things, about the describing, the rules, making the moves? I showed you the how to play Dungeon World flowchart, right?
Yes, I have it saved I have it somewhere in my bookmarks. But mostly I've been playing role-playing games not for 25 years but for 2 years, and that's like an amount of time. I've got a good idea of how stories work, and I guess most of my questions are about like how to do a good like in 4 hours, how do I make sure that we're not just wasting time and then it's over and nothing really happened and it didn't feel good or complete, or like,
well, I guess understanding your goals for the game, right? Like for you, what do you want to get out of the session, right? Are you, because this is above and beyond, you're choosing Dungeon World to accomplish this, and I think you've already done a little bit of this, but your goal as a person entering into this situation is above and beyond your goal as a game master, which is to just like play the game and run it correctly. But what do you want to get out of this? Do you want an entertaining stream for your viewers? Do you want to learn how to play Dungeon World properly? Do you want all of your players to think you're an awesome GM? Do you want us all to like suffer and feel bad? In which case, play Torchbearer. Like, what is your goal as a person? What does Bluejay want out of this session?
I want to tell a good story.
Sure. Okay. What is a good story?
Um, I think like the two things that are like the most my focus are entertaining and impactful, which I get like the second one is difficult and probably won't happen. But like, and the first one is kind of also out of my hands because like y'all are going to be entertaining no matter what you do.
You want things that you cannot control. You want byproducts.
Yeah, that's
it's very difficult to aim for those goals. Like that's like saying I want to have fun. Like you can do things that you know will be fun, but there's a synthesis, there's a chasing of that fun. And I think honestly, and I'll give you the same advice I give every game master ever in the history of time. Just talk to your players. Just be like, yo, this is what I want out of the game. This is what I'm hoping that we will do today. And if you just say to us, like, I'd like there to be a beginning and an end. Like, I'd like to feel like we have a solid conclusion. Can you cooperate? We will all try to self-police to not be like, well, we got an hour left in the session and we still haven't really accomplished anything. So let's just jerk around for another hour. Like, we will help you with that. That is going to be our goal too. Because I feel like it's your show in a very literal sense. In this case. Mm-hmm. And if you set those priorities out, this is exactly the same. If you're watching this at home and you're like, I want to play a role-playing game, even if you don't have an audience, you can talk to your players about what you intend, what your goals are, and you can say, hey, I would like to learn how to do this. I would like to learn how to play this game, and I don't know how. Can you help me? Can you be patient? Can you let me stumble through this and make these mistakes and help me with the rules? Or you can say, my priority is, X, Y, or Z. You can have these conversations with your players. So letting us know that that's what you want is a big step. And I think with this cast, it's sort of implied, like you're getting people who want to entertain and do those things.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, as like a less like adjective goal, I really want to like have a beginning and an end, right? I want to resolve things, even if it's not necessarily in the way that my prep has planned. Like even if we don't get to the end of whatever like micro adventure I've got prepared, like having something that feels like it's closed in some way is definitely something that I want.
So some tricks that I'll use, because you can't predict what the players will do, and B, you can't predict what the dice will do. So even if we are like, we're going to go to the castle, fight the evil Prince Florthag, and we're going to save Queen Garbasia, even if we're like really into it, the dice might be like, fuck you, you die, fuck you. Like you may just have to deal with that. And so what I'll often do is accept any sort of ending as an ending, but also in your pocket, just keep like your shitty M. Night Shyamalan twist so that you can just throw it in there as the cliff. Because a cliffhanger
is a type of ending.
It's a sort of ending. It's like you have to sneeze, but you can't. So you can throw that in near the end to be like, all right, so we don't have time to do the big final boss encounter. You open the doors and then like twist. You were dead all along, or whatever. Like you can have that. You probably won't need it. There will probably be a thing that will come up during play, but it can be fun to have a little like, and then this happens.
Okay.
It's also a nice way to kind of like flop it in as a like, maybe we could do this again and you could figure out what happens, right? Like that feels like it's a way to end it too.
When we get to X subs, I'll see if all these people have more time.
It feels like a pilot instead of a truncated, an unfinished thing, right? You want to be a TV pilot instead of, and like if it doesn't come back, that's fine. You still got the one story out of it. There may not be a sequel, but that idea that you can feel like there's more, there's always going to be more story to tell. There's always going to be more there.
And then another thing is one of the like I don't know the exact phrasing. I'm sure you do because you fucking wrote it. But there's the idea that all of these characters have bonds and like backstory that is created during character creation,
Yes.
and you're supposed to, or at least like you can, as some of your moves, like challenge that. And I think that in particular is interesting story wise to involve the characters, like challenge their beliefs in terms of like Burning Wheel, and create fiction that involves what you as the PCs have created. But there's a little bit of a conflict there in terms of like, this is what I have prepped and we only have this much time, and I don't know already what you're going to be doing.
So here's what you can do, and this combines a few of your sort of principles as the game master. Dungeon World will give you way too much information to start because Dungeon World is meant to be played over the course of like 10 to 12 sessions, not one. We will give you way too much shit to play with. Just find the stuff that's interesting to you and find the places that you can overlap, right? So like if you ask the fighter like, what is the greatest monster you ever fought and it got away? Like what is the thing you wish you could have defeated? And they're like, the green manticore of Black Rock Mountain. You can be like, okay, cool, green manticore. You can make a note. And then later, when you're talking to the wizard and you're like, what is the worst atrocity you ever committed in the name of magical science? And they're like, oh, I made a horrible creature that escaped. You can be like, well, fucking obviously they're the same. This strategy, this style draws on the idea of like pulling you're asking questions of the players and you're building on the answers. So you're building on each other's answers and you're using what they are giving you to build one cohesive thing or a series of semi-cohesive things. But really this is just ripping off Dogs in the Vineyard, because in Dogs in the Vineyard the game is built around a fairly small community of people, and so one person's drunkard cousin is another player's angry brother, right? So you end up in this situation where they all kind of link together. And in a one-shot, I think you can get away with doing that more aggressively. You can lean into that coincidence. Like, what a coincidence. The crime you were arrested for was stealing something from this other player's liege, and now the two of you are on the run. Like, you can play into these things getting woven together, and that's how you survive. I find a one shot that feels cohesive in terms of not just sitting down and being like, your bonds don't matter, your backstory doesn't matter because I have my own thing. The other way you can do this is by drawing on the idea of drawing maps and leaving blanks. So instead of, when you build your game, instead of being like, y'all work for the Elven Prince Throndir, Lord of the White Woods, King of the Spider Reaches. Like, you can just be like, patron, right? Obnoxious patron. And then you can ask the bard, like, yo, you're currently working for a really obnoxious douchebag. Tell me about this person. And they can be like, oh, it's the Elf Prince Throndir. And you're like, making notes. You want to kind of mad lib your shit by saying, I have these ideas about archetypes or spaces, but I'm going to let the players fill in the detail, because then the bard is connected to Throndir directly. We're never going to feel as connected to something you made up as we are to something we feel like we made up, so you can trick us into thinking we made it up by asking leading questions. Instead of saying, you're on a quest to defeat the dark dragon Fnorvir, you can ask us questions that lead us to inventing the enemy that you've already got in your head, right? So you just mad lib us. You just say like, all right, what is your employer like? Or what do you think about dragons? Or, like there's room for you to ask leading questions. And I think that for me, that's the way that I take prep and I bend it to fit what the players want. Yeah, and it's a thing that allows you to stick to your prep and be honest to what you want, but also allow us to be a part of that. So leaving those gaps in your prep that we can fill in will allow us to feel like we're participating in the world, but it allows you to keep control. Yeah. I think, it's tempting to try, like, we want to have a cohesive experience, and it's tempting to try to like tie up all those things. But I think that a lot of the time you can allow a question to go unanswered, but hint at it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if it doesn't go anywhere in play. Remember, you don't have to. Chekhov's gun is not a principle of role playing games necessarily. Like, if I tell you that I have a vendetta against like a duelist in the capital, and you hint a couple of times that this duelist might be like available or like chasing us, or like, you hint at it, you don't have to pay it out. It doesn't, not everything has to pay off. Things can just lead in a direction. Because again, think of it as a pilot of a TV show. I may not get a chance to fight this guy until episode 10 if we get picked up by the network.
Mm-hmm.
So don't worry too much about like following through on everything. Stick to your main thing. Try to keep it simple, but let the characters' backgrounds flow into that. And I find the questions, like, I have my own set of questions I tend to ask players based on their class and their character's race.
Mm-hmm.
If for example someone is the only elf in the party, let them make up all the shit about elves. If somebody,
Yeah, no, you did
like, if
that
somebody
for
is a
our
fighter,
one shot.
yeah, if somebody is a fighter, they're picking that class because they want to fight stuff, and they're thinking about swords and armor and cool fighter shit. Let them define some of that stuff in the world. And then also, if two people are playing something similar, right? If there's two elves, let them argue about or debate about stuff, right? Let someone make a clear choice that should affect the other player. So be like, player one who's playing an elf, tell me a fact about elves. Like, ask them a specific question. They're going to say it, and then look at the other player and be like, well, you're an elf. Is that true? Like, is that for all elves? And like create a little bit of that creative tension, right? So it allows us to, because people are going to be like, oh, wait, that's not my idea for my character. But you can be like, cool, okay, how are they wrong, right? Like, if that's not true for you, or how is that true? Or when someone makes a declarative statement about another player's character type, their class, or whatever, if someone says like, oh, well, elves had to move to the moon because of the great war with the humans, which the humans started because humans are dicks. Ask a human player like, okay, that's the elven perspective. Why do you think elves had to move to the moon? Right? Like, I find it very useful to call people on their bullshit. People will often, there's a certain type of player, and I could call out a bunch of people, but I won't. There's a certain type of player who likes to say things declaratively because they want to test you. They want to be like, here's this absurd, outlandish thing that I'm saying like it's true. And they're like, yeah, you're going to tell me I'm wrong? I call bullshit. I'm like, yeah, that is true. And what's more, here's some additional bullshit, right? So you can do that, but don't be afraid to say, no, that doesn't quite fit with my prep, but by making them special. If someone says, all elves live on the moon, and you're like, fuck, I need like an elven kingdom on Earth, you can be like,
Except,
well, why did your elven tribe move to the moon, right? Why did you leave the rest of the elves behind? Or like, what elven city is the last one on Earth, right? What elves didn't you? Because you get to make those statements, and they're not allowed to say, oh, none of them, because you didn't say, did any elves stay behind? You said which ones did or why, right? You're allowed to make these declarative statements about the world because that's your job as the game master, right? It's part of your doing the prep. It's part of your portraying the fantastic world. Your job is the world. So you can make statements that players are not allowed to countermand, but generally don't make them about those players without giving them a loophole to be special, right? Like, this is the Driz Do'Urden thing where you're like, all drow are evil. And then Driz players like, actually, my drow is chaotic good. And you're like, all right, Salvatore, whatever, man. You can be the only good drow in the universe. Tell me about your magic swords. And that's okay. That's just like a thing that players will do because we all want to feel like special snowflakes. You just got to help them do it in a way that doesn't violate your ideas, because your ideas matter, right? There's this idea that dungeon masters just have to like say yes to everything, which is horseshit. You get to say no, but you got to do it in a way that creates more stuff rather than like, no, shut up, go sit over there, which I don't think you're going to do, but just for everybody, that's the thing. Yeah. So you have some ideas about where you want the game to go. You have a cast. You're going to talk to them about kind of flow of the game, trying to aim for a particular ending. During the game itself, is there anything that you are particularly like feeling like you want to avoid because you're worried that it's gonna like you're gonna have a hard time with it, or are there particular moves that you're like nervous about? anything specific to the game or to the experience of GMing that you're like feeling like, I hope this doesn't happen, or you want to avoid?
Um, I don't think I've seen like in terms of moves, I don't think that there's been anything that's like, oh god, I hope that this really doesn't like become a thing. I know that leading the players through character creation when I've only created a character in Dungeon World the once might or might not be difficult depending on how much like
Do you
going
have
over
do
I
you have
have.
do you have Truncheon World handy? So for fans at home, hold that sucker up again.
Oh, sorry.
Johnstone Metzger is a fantastic human being, and Johnstone made this. It is a truncated version of the rules, which means most of my good stuff got cut out of Dungeon World. It's a little booklet that you can get that is that walks you through just like a reference. It's the what's the American version of this? Cliff Notes.
Yeah, I
It's the
think
Cliff
so.
Notes version of Dungeon World, and it's super cool for running it. It's a book that I keep on hand when I run the game,
There's the
and there's character creation.
creation.
It narrows everything down to a couple of pages. It's a great reference to have if you are looking to GM and you want to play Dungeon World. It's a fantastic little book. Definitely check it out. John Stone's awesome. Go look it up. So that'll help. All you have to do is just walk through that. Obviously, I'm going to try my damnedest not to like backseat you at all for any of this stuff. So if you're floundering, I'm going to keep my mouth shut, but you can ask. You can be like, how does this rule work? What does this do? This is dumb. You don't have to know all the rules. Because if you did, no one would ever want to GM ever at all. I'm going to try to be your Dan. I'm going to be your Dan's Gaming. And if you need me, I'm here. But otherwise, you can make the call. I will tell you this about actually running the game. You want to know a secret? You want to know a secret about Dungeon World that we didn't put
Yeah.
in the book? You want to know top secrets? Okay. So the game says when it's your turn to talk, GM, when you get to make a move, you make a move. You pick a move from the list and you make it. The game says never speak the name of your move. Don't be like, I am going to use up your resources. The goblin cuts the strap on your backpack and all your rations fall out. You don't say, I'm going to offer you an opportunity with or without cost. You don't say any of that. And part of that is because the narrative flows from the game master, and we don't want to hear that shit from you. It's not good. But the other reason why you don't speak the name of the move is you can just do whatever feels like the right thing to do. And then later when we're like, what were you doing? You just look at the move list and be like, well, obviously I was putting someone in a spot. Come on. Obviously. I'm a great GM.
Yep.
So that's part of it, is that like the inverse of this as a list, right? The list of moves is there to give you something to do, to be like, fuck, I don't know what to do. I'm going to turn your move back on you. Cool. The magic missile spell you just failed. The magic missiles fly out of your fingertips and swirl around, and they hit your friend, the gnome, and he falls into a hole. What do you do? Right?
Oh.
That's making a move, that's dealing damage, that's turning their move back on them. That's all that shit. But the list is there to help you out when you need it, but it's honestly just most things that every Dungeon World dungeon master will end up doing anyway. And then you can later backdate your moves. You can look at it and be like, and this is actually a really useful thing to do if you are someone who is learning this game and you want to like get some expertise with Dungeon World. Take a session and just wing it. Don't look at the move list. And then look back at your move list and you'll realize you were actually just making these moves all along, right? The tap shoes were never magic. It was all within you in the beginning. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy copies of Dungeon World. But the move list is there because this is the stuff that makes fun fantasy fiction, and you pretty much already know all these moves and will do them instinctively, but the move list is there in case you can't figure it out, in case you're like, shit, I don't know what to do. It's also there to teach people who do not have a foundation in fantasy fiction how to be a good game master, right? So when you get to this place where you're like, fuck, I don't know what to do, just pick a move and then describe it, right? Show a downside to their class, race, or equipment. They look at you and they're like, I stride into this tavern in Human Town and I wave about my elven sash. You can be like, okay, cool. Well, it's Human Town. They don't really like elves. Someone gets up and they're like, what are you doing here, Moon Man? That's just showing a downside of their race, right? People don't like moon elves. Go back to the moon, moon elf. So yeah, just keep the moves list handy. And when you get that feeling of like, oh God, it's my turn to do something, just look at the list and pick something. And then let the fiction flow from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of any like hitches or stuff that I think people struggle with as a first time GM, and it's all just like comfort and confidence, right? That's like there's some stuff that you'll just learn. You're going to be way more stressed out in the 10 minutes before we start than you are going to be in the 10 minutes at the end, right? By the time we get to the end of the episode, you're just going to be like, I fucking got this. I'm the best game master in the world. Give me experience. I'm going to mark experience for being so good. That's what you're going to do.
Yeah, okay.
You're going to be feeling that. But right now and in the following subsequent days between now and Sunday, you're going to feel like nervous and like you're going to fuck it up and that everybody's going to hate you and that YouTube's going to be mean and Twitch chat's going to be dicks and like some of those things might end up being true, but you will get better at it. You will be astronomically better by the time we get to character creation being finished than you think that you are now. You'll be great. And this is true of everybody. I'm not just saying this because I actually believe in Bluejay's skills as a game master. I think this is true of all people playing role-playing games or really doing anything. It's always way more scary before you do it. You'll figure it out. And you don't have to do it perfectly, especially with Dungeon World. There's lots of room to do it the way you want to do it and then be like, yeah, I did it right because I made the moves and shut up. It's fine. You don't have to worry about getting the rules wrong because you have someone there who is an expert at the game, and I think you'll do fine. It's just a question of acknowledging that and knowing it when you go in. Like you're gonna be good, and even the worst case scenario, you have all of these other people to back you up.
Do you think that I'm gonna be good though? Specifically me, not just
Yes, I do. I do specifically think because you read books. Seriously, no, this is not like I'm not even fucking around. Like yes, you've played role playing games and you like watch role playing games and you understand how they work functionally, but like you watch movies and you read comics and you read books and like you expose yourself to narrative. People who don't read are just universally not as exposed to this stuff as people who do. So like you said at the beginning, you know what stories feel like and you know what kinds of things are interested in stories, and you're thinking about creating a formed experience. So like you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's not just books, it's like other stuff. Watching movies is just important too. For Chad, who's like, I'm upset because I don't read books.
But books are great.
Read books, listen to audiobooks, fucking browse Wikipedia for hours. Do it. I don't care. It makes you a better GM. Yeah. I mean, I think like embrace that. Like, don't be scared to say like, you know what? I don't really know this. Again, this is a ripcord in Dungeon World and all of the like apocalypse games. You have a ripcord called ask questions. So like, even when it is explicitly your job to make a move, just ask a fucking question. And you can do it either in a way that's like, you know what? I don't know what would happen here. Like I'm stumped. What do you think? Turn it over to another player. Don't let a player narrate their own negative outcomes because they'll just be bullshit to you. Like if they're like, I attacked the ogre. Oh, I got a 6. And you're like, I don't know. What would the ogre do? They're going to be like, the ogre will probably pat me on the head and give me 1,000 gold. I think that's what the ogre does because I tried to stab him. He's so scared of me, he runs away and then he cries.
Yeah, that's definitely what happens. Yeah.
Don't let players
and then gets 5 of his friends.
Yeah, don't let players narrate their own negative outcomes. So if I flub a roll and you don't know what to do, turn it over to anyone but Nadja, please, for the love of God. Turn it over to Matt and be like, Matt, what do you think happens? Right? This is like
now I'm gonna turn it over to Nadja.
No, don't let Nadja GM me. Don't do it. She'll kill me.
You just yeah. You gave me fuel,
no,
Adam.
Do not give the immolator fuel. So here's that's one thing you can do. You have the ask questions. You can admit, like, I don't know what would happen here. What do you think? This can be because you're not that invested in the outcome, right? Like if someone says like, I seduced the barman, and you're like, this is a digression. I don't care. You failed. What do you tell me the most? Because the person comes in and they know they're like, oh, this is another opportunity for me to make fun of my own character, my goofy bard or whatever. Like you can turn that over to us to narrate if you're not sure what to do. The other thing is you can just be like, okay, give me a second. I'm going to look at the moves. and then take a second, look at them, and then just do honestly. And this is the thing, we get caught up, especially when it comes to improvising stuff. We get caught up in trying to do what the coolest thing is. And if you go hunting for the coolest thing, you'll never do anything. If you're just sitting there being like, what would the greatest possible response to this failed inconspicuous test be? No, shut up. I'm still thinking. What is it? Okay. No, that's not cool enough. I could do better. You're not writing a fucking novel, right? Just do the first thing that comes to mind. Just be like, do the obvious thing. Be like, oh, obviously you attempt to seduce the barman and you fail. So his husband comes out and throws a pan at you. That's funny. That's the first thing that would happen. I already thought about this bar. That's what happens, right? Like, don't overanalyze. Just like let it happen. Just and you can go back, right? You can be like, you do the thing, and if we all look at you like we all just die, like that's you can be like, oh, you know what? Okay, it's fine. We can let's do a different thing.
You have a vision of that you're all gonna die, but it doesn't really happen. Something else happens.
Yeah.
That was a mistake.
I mean, I think you don't even have to make it like realistic in the game. You don't even have to narrate that. You can just say like, we're all playing a game together as people. You can just be like, you know what? Never mind. I changed my mind. It's dumb. The ogre wouldn't throw you off a cliff. He rips your sword out of your hand and throws that off the cliff. That makes more sense because he doesn't want to kill you. He's a friendly ogre. Shrek is not here to murder anybody. So, you can think about that as an option. Things might happen mechanically that you don't expect, like in hour 2, somebody might roll really bad and die, and then they might take their last breath and they might like die. That's okay. It's fine. You can let that person be your backup GM, right? You can just turn to ask them a bunch of questions. You can be like, all right, Adam, what do you think this would do? Okay, cool, thanks. And you can let them back you up. They can be your co-GM. But again, you're in control, so only ask questions we want. Or you can be like, all right, cool, you're a ghost now. You're haunting the party. And then just like, they don't have a physical body. They're dead. They're floating around. But you can be like, hey, okay, you're a ghost. What do you do? Right? Like, they're sitting around the fire and they're talking shit about you and you just died. You can do one supernatural thing. What do you do? And then the person who died.
I want that to be Nadja. Not that I want Nadja to die, but I think she would be the best ghost.
I want Nadja to die. Bluejay 2018. So that's just like, that's a thing you can do. You can just throw them in. There's lots of room to like to turn that dial, right? And a ghost character is a way to adjust the dial, to be like, me and this other person are responsible for these things. And you can give that other person like the responsibility over like a ghostly stuff. And you can take them aside or whatever, and you can be like, okay. And you do this in front of the other players in the audience because it's fun to reveal things. Keeping stuff secret is boring. You can be like, okay, cool. So you're a ghost. Turns out that the evil queen Sorceressia, she's capturing ghosts and bending them to her service. So you work for her now. She's going to use you to follow the players. And like, you can just fucking lay that out because the players we're going to like that. We're going to be like, oh shit. Like, it's Queen Sorceressia. She's the worst. We hate her. Let's go get her. But stick to your prep, but be flexible around what that looks like. Mad lib your players' backgrounds into your idea of the things that might happen, and then just play to find out what happens. And sometimes it's like serious, intense character drama, and other times it's the Waypoint one shot, and everybody's talking about flatulence and skeletonitis or whatever. You can't predict 100% how it's going to go, but you can have conversations with your players about what you hope for. Does that sound good? How do you feel about it? Let's do a review. How do you feel about your first GMing experience right now? What are you feeling?
I'm really glad that I have a group of friend people who I know are going to support me, even though I'm hella nervous and scared that I'm just going to fuck everything up forever.
The goal is not to feel less nervous because that's not going to happen. The goal, I think, is to just trust that the experience is going to be good, and you've already done so much work to make that possible, right? All of the stuff you could prep for is prepped in terms of the like game layer of like making it be a good time. You've chosen good players. You're playing a game system that's not going to be too hard to run. All of the mechanical stuff like the overlays and all that, you have offloaded onto some sucker who's going to do it for you. And all you have to do is just like follow the rules of the game, and that will generate a good time. You've done all of the stuff. But doing away with being nervous, that won't happen until afterwards, when you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. You can look back to today and the subsequent days between here and there and be like, Bluejay, you were nervous. You're gonna be great. You're gonna be primo. I think so. Anyway, do you have any final questions? Anything you want to like drag up, either for your own sake or for the sake of other first time GMs? Do you have any advice for first time GMs based on all the hard work you've done so far? Parting words, Bluejay?
Don't pick cast members who are busy, and don't let them get sick by making out with their stupid wives.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Getting sick and don't pick players. Got it. It's good advice. I like it.
All your players should be robots who never get sick ever. And no, I guess like I feel like a lot of the pre-GM stuff I kind of learned from being around you nerds anyway. Mm-hmm. Like being and I feel like this is something that a lot of people who are just playing not in front of such a huge audience kind of don't pay attention to as much, but there's been a lot of discussion about it in terms of what a role-playing game cast looks like and what it maybe should look like instead. And I don't know, just being conscious about like what I, as a person who is showcasing like making content, being an influencer, my decisions about how the game looks and how the cast looks is very different from someone who's just playing with their friends. But just the idea that like, I don't know, pay attention to what it is that you're showing people if you're gonna be doing content, and if you're just playing it with your friends, and that's totally cool too, but like maybe pay attention to like what kind of friends you have.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really important, and it speaks to what I consider to be the most fundamental success like indicator in a role-playing game, is that you are playing with people who support you and choosing those people, and not even necessarily being 100% on them before you play, but just like choosing people that you feel comfortable communicating with as people, right? A lot of game masters forget that you're playing a game with other humans, and ostensibly these humans like you enough to like play a game with you. So talk to them about the stuff that you're curious about or interested in the game, things that you're feeling anxious about. Talk to your players, tell them what your priorities are, listen to them when they tell you theirs, and then the thing that you make together will be better as a result. So I think you've done a great job with that. You have a bunch of really great players, and then also me, and you will. I think you'll have a fine time. I'm super excited for the game. Why don't you tell our audience before we bid them adieu, where and what's the deal? Tell them where they can see this beautiful thing.
We've been talking about my first ever time GMing, which will be on April 1st. It's not an April Fool's joke, and it's also not your Easter present. It will be on April 1st on my channel, twitch.tv/Bluejay. You should follow so you don't forget. With Adam, the co-creator of a multi-award-winning tabletop role-playing game, Dungeon World, with Sage Latora on the drums. Also Trista Ray, Naja Otikor, Matt Mercer, and Holly Conrad. It will be at 1 p.m. Pacific time because mornings suck and I live in the Pacific time zone. And it'll be available probably on YouTube and stuff after.
Cool. There you go. April 1st, 1 p.m. twitch.tv/Bluejay. Be there. Or I don't know, you'll miss it, which would make you sad. It made me sad too. I'd be sad if you didn't come and watch. I'm probably gonna play a paladin or maybe a wizard. I've been chopping some ideas around in my head. I gotta figure out the tone of the game. I have like a serious character, and then I have a not very serious character. This may be the premiere of Pamplemousse LaCroix, but we'll see.
Oh God.
We'll see. I'm thinking about it. I gotta figure it out. I promise I won't play like a Dr. Grigori or a Cantor Hague. I don't hate you or my friends that much. Cool. So this is Office Hours. The last couple of episodes, I've had some friends of mine on to give them some advice about specific stuff. Normally, though, this is a call-in Game Master advice show. So if you have questions for this guy, you can submit them on my website, www.adam-koble.com. If you cannot spell Koble, it's the name of the Twitch channel you're watching right now. Also the YouTube channel you could be watching this on. So just use that. adam-koble.com. There's a link at the top that says Office Hours. Click on that. There's a form. Fill out that form. If you'd like to record your voice, I would love it. It makes for good content. If not, that's okay. Record your question, submit it. I get a lot of questions, and a lot of them are similar, so if I don't answer yours, it's probably because there's a similar one in the archive. We've been doing this for a while now. This is episode number 66. Thank you for watching. Submit your questions to my website. We will see you next time for Office Hours. Special thank you to Bluejay. Bluejay, thank you for coming, for sharing your anxieties about game mastering. I hope this has helped. And for folks at home, I hope that Bluejay is a great example for you of someone who is going hard instead of going home. So you don't have to do it as hardcore as Bluejay, but whatever you do, Professor Adam is here to support you. Thanks for coming, everybody. We will see you all next time. Bye-bye.